Alright, this is a comprehensive video of upper limb fractures all in kind of one place, but obviously it's going to be slightly long, so grab the popcorn. We have about 10 conditions to cover, and also there's flashcards in the description below. Our first one is a clavicle fracture, which is kind of nice and simple. This is basically just loss of sensation. So you have your supraclavicular nerve is damaged, your fractures here. That takes origin from C3, C4, and it provides sensation over the top here, and also in the bit of the pectoral region. So in a clavicle fracture, you lose those. Alright, the next couple of fractures are fractures of the humerus. There's a couple key anatomical points you have to know. So you obviously got your humeral head, you've got your anatomical neck of the humerus. This is kind of like a remnant of the growth plate back in the day. Then you've got your tuberosity, and so your two tuberosities are basically where your what they call rotator cuff muscles attached to. So on your greater tuberosity, you have your teres minor, your infraspinatus and your supraspinatus, and then in your lesser tuberosity, you have your subscapularis attaching. So your surgical neck here, that is not like a physical kind of place on the humerus. It's a place of weakness where the humerus can fracture quite a lot. Further down, you've got your attachment of your deltoid muscle, your deltoid tuberosity. Then you've got your two epicondyles, and these kind of form your elbow joint, your olecranon. So your medial epicondyle is on your inside, and the ulnar nerve runs around here. So when you whack it, you're whacking your funny bone. That's when you get, like, it feels weird because you're whacking your ulnar nerve. And your lateral epicondyle is obviously on the outside. Then you've got your trochlea, and trochlea kind of rhymes with ulnar. So trochlea, ulnar. So the ulnar fits into the trochlea, and the radius fits into the capitulum. Okay, so you can get fractures along various sites of the humerus, and they will affect different nerves. But thankfully, there's like a nice mnemonic to know where the fracture is and what nerve is affected. So the mnemonic is arm, ARM. So if we start with an A. If the surgical neck has a fracture, that's your axillary nerve that is damaged. Further down, if it's a midshaft fracture of your humerus, so in the middle of the shaft of the humerus, that's your radial nerve damaged. And if we're at our supracondylar region, which is just above our epicondyles, then that is our median nerve damaged. So again, axillary, radial, median nerve. So that's what we'll be going through. Obviously, our first one we're going to be discussing is the surgical neck fracture. So what do we have here? We have our clavicle, we have our acromion, and acromion basically means, like, acropolis means like something at the top, so like top of the hill. This is the acropolis. This is the coracoid process. Coracoid meaning like beak of a crow. So it kind of looks like a beak of a crow. This is our humerus. This is our greater tuberosity and our lesser tuberosity. So our greater one is the one that the teres minor, infraspinatus, supraspinatus is attached to, and our lesser one, the subscapularis, attaches to. So all of these are rotator cuff muscles, the sits muscles. And then this is our surgical neck here. So this is our anatomical neck here, just at the end of the growth plate. And our surgical neck is just here, as you can see. And this is where our axillary nerve is. So that there is our axillary nerve. So a fracture to the surgical neck can result in the axillary nerve being damaged. Okay, so you can see it there quite clearly, and also you can see this one has resulted in two fractures of the surgical neck. So when you damage the axillary nerve, which takes innervation from C5, C6, what is going to happen? Well, firstly, also you've got the posterior circumflex humeral artery running around here, so that may also be damaged. But the axillary nerve supplies two muscles, the deltoid, which is this guy here. So let's so you can see, let's get this working. There you go. So you can see the deltoid is the main abductor of the arm, meaning taking away, because when you abduct someone, you take them away. Well, like, hopefully you guys don't abduct anyone, but anyways. And so if your axillary nerve is damaged, then your deltoid won't be able to do this thing. So your arm cannot be abducted, so it gets adducted, meaning kind of glued to your side. So the deltoid lifts up your arm from 15 to 90 degrees. Your teres minor actually starts off the abduction, but that's not working either. So your arm is going to be adducted. And this is your teres minor. As well as starting off abduction, it is a lateral rotator. You can see here, it's rotating outwards. So what happens is, because if this is not working because of the axillary nerve being damaged in a surgical neck fracture, then your arm is going to struggle to laterally rotate and kind of medially rotate inwards. So that's a surgical neck fracture. And also another thing is the axillary nerve branches off into something called the superior lateral cutaneous nerve. Cutaneous meaning off the skin, lateral meaning it's kind of on this side, and superior meaning it's kind of quite up here. So this supplies here, which is called your regimental patch, or like where soldiers put their regiment badge. And so when you're touching there, that's this nerve here. So this nerve will also lose its innervation, so you lose sensation of your regimental patch. Okay, so what's our mnemonic? ARM. So we've done axillary nerve. Our next one is a radial nerve damage, and radial nerve damage occurs in a midshaft fracture. So the shaft of the bone is just like the main bony bit of the bone, and obviously the median nerve is damaged in the supracondylar fracture. So in midshaft fracture, we get our radius damaged. And here we can see this is the midshaft of the thingy, and the only nerve kind of touching the midshaft is the radius. Here we have our musculocutaneous nerve, then we have our ulnar nerve, and then here we have our median nerve. So you can see these three guys are not touching, but the midshaft. But when the midshaft fractures, the radial nerve is going to be KO'd, and you can kind of see a midshaft fracture here. So the damage to the radial nerve means, so the radial nerve supplies all the extensors of your wrist. So your extensors are the ones on the dorsum of your the dorsal side of your hand. And with the extensors not working, this is going to lead to something called wrist drop. So basically, it's basically like you're flexing your wrist. So there's nothing to unopposed flexion of your wrist essentially. So that's wrist drop. And you also may lose sensation here in your back of your hand. So again, the radial nerve supplies this side of the hand, and it causes it to go upwards. With it dying, well, not dying, but being KO'd basically, then it's you're going to get wrist drop. Also, another thing with a midshaft fracture is you may damage the brachial artery, which means that all the blood supply here might be lost, so you might get pulseless limb, so you won't be able to feel a pulse here. What else? I think, okay, yep, that's everything except for the fact that a midshaft fracture can occur when you have something called fouche, fall on an outstretched hand. So basically, when you fall and your hands are in front of you, this can cause a radial fracture. A midshaft fracture, which damages the radial nerve. You also get the same symptoms here, minus the brachial artery thingy, but the same symptoms of wrist drop when the radial nerve is affected in something called Saturday night palsy. So I remember it as like you listen to your radio on a Saturday night to relax. So on a Saturday night, basically this is compression of your basically of your axilla here. When you compress your axilla, you compress your radial nerve, so this bit here, and then you can also get wrist drop. It's called Saturday's night because like apparently you drink too much on a Saturday, on a Friday, and on a Saturday you got like kind of twisted over, like compressed against your axilla. But yeah, I remember it's like on Saturday night you listen to the radio. Okay. Then just to kind of take a break for a second from our acronym and that analogy, our ARM acronym, we just need to say two things about the humeral shaft fractures. So the humeral shaft is basically the main bit of the humerus, and the deltoid is your main abductor of your arm, and this attaches at something called the deltoid tuberosity. So here we have our deltoid here, our nice big juicy muscle, and it attaches to your deltoid tuberosity, this bit in purple. So there's two things that you need to know. If your fracture is below your deltoid tuberosity here, do you think the deltoid will be working or not? Well, it will be working because it's attached to the deltoid tuberosity. So if your fracture is here, it will still be able to abduct. So if your fracture is below the deltoid tuberosity, the fractured bone will be pulled away by the deltoid, which is the abductor. So you can see here, a fracture above the deltoid tuberosity has led to this fracture being pulled outwards. And if the fracture is above the deltoid tuberosity, so i.e. here, then your deltoid has nothing to attach on, which means your deltoid will not be working, right? So this cannot abduct your fracture. Therefore, if your fracture is above your deltoid tuberosity, for example here, you can see the top bit of the arm is actually pulled inwards because it can't be abducted by the deltoid. So that is something that you need to know about as well. Okay, we move on back to our acronym T with a supracondylar fracture. So here we have our arm again, and our deltoid tuberosity, remember, so above the deltoid tuberosity means it's not working, which means the deltoid is not working, which means your fracture gets pulled inwards. But below your deltoid tuberosity, your deltoid will be able to work because it's attached to the arm, which means your fracture will be pulled outwards. Okay, supracondylar fracture. So ARM is the median nerve that's affected. So supracondylar basically means above the condyles, and this leads to damage of the median nerve, specifically something called the anterior interosseous branch. Now, the median nerve, as well as supplying other stuff, it supplies the thenar muscles, which are the muscles kind of your thumb, and these do abduction, adduction, and flexion of the thumb at your metacarpal phalangeal joints, and also at your carpometacarpal joints, so the ones that basically connect your wrist bones to your finger. So basically, your median nerve allows you to move your thumb in various directions. However, if this is KO'd by a supracondylar fracture, it may mean you won't be able to move your thumb. So your thumb is kind of like adducted now instead of abducted. So your thumb is glued to all your fingers. And this is called ape hand because apes can't oppose their fingers, right? You also may get a pulse system in this as well because of damage to the brachial artery. Now, what actually is a supracondylar fracture? It usually occurs in kids. So if your question stem like has the word kids in it, for example, like people who are young, then it's more likely to be a supracondylar fracture. It doesn't really occur that much in adults. And on the X-ray, this is something that you need to see, is something called the posterior fat pad sign, which is called the Sale sign as well. In adults, if you see the sign, it's a radial head fracture, but it's the same kind of thing you're looking for in the X-ray. But the one you need to know about is the supracondylar fracture, so that's why. Okay, this, my friends, is a normal hand X-ray, arm X-ray. Okay, so this is our humerus, and you can see here, this kind of black is less dense than bone, so black is the fat, kind of fat lining thing. This is the normal kind of fat pad, so you've got kind of like a bit of fat on the front of your arm. Okay. And you can't really, there is some fat at the back, but you usually don't see it in a healthy person. So that's healthy. Now, when you get the fracture here of your supracondylar region, so basically here, your fracture along here, for example, you're going to get joint effusion, which is going to lead to your fat pads becoming more swollen up, right? So they're going to now stick out like a sail. So as you can see here, it's quite close to the arm, whereas here, the angle is much more triangular like a sail. And you can also see all this black space here, which is the posterior fat pad sign. So you get the sail sign and the posterior fat pad sign, which is which shows you looking at joint effusion, which in kids is definitely a supracondylar fracture. And here you can see a more extreme version. You can see the fracture all across here. And hopefully if you didn't see it in this one, you can see the big kind of black marking here. So I'm just going to go over it again. That is your sail sign. You can see the kind of sail of a boat, and all this kind of black space at the back is your effusion, basically showing that your body's trying to react to this fracture. Now this applies to basically all fractures, but specifically for this fracture you need to know it. You can classify these fractures as type 1, type 2, or type 3. So type 1 means a non-displaced fracture, so it's basically like a little fracture, but the bones are still connecting. Type 2 is a somewhat displaced fracture, so like the bones are connecting a little bit, but there's still like more of a gap between them. And a type 3 fracture is obviously quite a bad one. Is when your bones are not touching at all. So for example, if this isn't exactly a type 3, but if they weren't touching at all, then it would be a type 3. Okay. What are we talking about next? I've actually forgotten. Okay, the next thing we're talking about is a medial epicondyle fracture. Now, hashtag also means fracture, but it's cool to use it. All right, so your medial epicondyle, remember, this is the one that the ulnar nerve runs along, the funny bone kind of thing. So this is on the inside of your elbow. And if you fracture this, so here, this bit here is a bit of the medial epicondyle that has come off. This is our radius. Remember, our radius attaches to the capitulum of the humerus, and this is the ulnar. So the ulnar is the big kind of juicy bit at this end of the humerus. And this attaches to the trochlea, so ulnar trochlear process. And obviously on the ulnar side, we've got the ulnar nerve running. So this is our medial epicondyle. So damage to the medial epicondyle can lead to damage to the ulnar nerve. And this is like, they like this kind of thing in exams. They don't tell you explicitly about it, like they don't show you an x-ray, but they expect you to know the course of the ulnar nerve, and they expect you to know that if the medial epicondyle is damaged, then you'll get the symptoms of claw hand. So what does the ulnar nerve usually do? Well, it innervates basically your fourth and fifth fingers with a muscle called the lumbricals. So the lumbricals, they usually flex your MCP joint. So that's this joint here. Let's get. So they're going to flex this joint here and extend your IP joints. So your IP joints, which are the end of your fingers, they're nice and straight, and this bit is flexed, so you can see it just here. So this is your normal action of your lumbricals. They flex your MCP joints like this, kind of this L shape, and then they keep the end of your fingers nice and straight. So your lumbricals have innervation by your ulnar nerve, that's fingers, your third and fourth lumbricals. Your first and second lumbricals have innervation by the median nerve. So the third and fourth lumbricals will be damaged because the other two have innervation by the median nerve in a medial epicondyle fracture, which means that your fourth and fifth fingers are now going to do the opposite of what they normally do. So instead of flexing at the MCP joints, they're going to extend at the MCP joints, and they're going to flex at the IP joints. That's the important one to bear in mind. So basically, your fingers are going to curl inwards from the IP joints. This causes like a claw-shaped hand, and you can see it's in fingers 4 and 5. Fingers 1, 2, 3 are fine because their lumbricals are by their median nerve, but this guy, you can see that the MCP is extended, so this bit is straight, but the IP joints are curled inwards, are flexed, and so causing this kind of claw hand. Now, if you've been a good student, you'll know that this is similar to Klumpke's palsy, and Klumpke's palsy causes something called median claw, and it's basically the same thing, but in fingers 1 and 2, because the median nerve is affected instead, and you also get a bit of 4 and 5 in Klumpke's as well, but it's more 1 and 2. So this is kind of the same thing. Okay. The same thing, obviously, but for different fingers. Okay, just more about the ulnar nerve. It's not really about fracture related, but while we're here. So the ulnar nerve passes through two bones, the hamate and the pisiform, your wrist bones. So obviously, if they get damaged, you can get damage to the ulnar nerve as well, which can also cause clawing, and like a bit of loss of sensation as well. And this is another picture of the ulnar claw. So you can see fingers 1, 2, 3 are fine, but 4 and 5, you can see that extended at the MCP joints, so nice and straight here, but not nice and straight because it's a bad thing, but anyway, they're straight here and curled inwards at the end. Okay, our next fracture, we're actually going to look at two fractures here, is a distal radius fracture. So this is our friend, and he's falling on an outstretched hand. So this is how you fall on an outstretched hand. It's called a Fuchs injury, and this causes something called a Colle's fracture. So basically, we're now all the way kind of almost at our wrist now. And a Colle's fracture occurs when you fall on the dorsal of your hand, so you fall basically on the normal side of your hand when you fall, and this can lead to carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, the distal radius fracture, the Colle's fracture, what it does is, because you're falling on your dorsum of your hand gets pushed upwards, and it gets this kind of dinner fork appearance. So remember, diniform, distal radius, dorsum. So the dinner fork appearance pushes it upwards, and so your hand is kind of upwards like this. And then you can see here, this is your radius fracture here. So this is your radius, this is your ulnar, and you can see the line here is your fracture. And you've got another type of fracture called a Smith fracture, which is the opposite of this. So the Colle fracture is more common, and it's when your hand is pointing upwards like this, because you fall normally. But if, for example, you fall when your hand is flexed, which is kind of weird, but so your hand is like facing upwards instead, then what happens is your hand gets basically pushed downwards. So when your hand is flexed, your hand will be facing downwards, and then you fall with your hands facing downwards, then it's going to push your hand downwards, okay, like this. So you can kind of see here, this is your, obviously the hand should be here and being pushed downwards. So unlike the dinner fork appearance in the Colle fracture, the Smith's fracture gives the kind of garden spade downwards appearance. So you should be able to differentiate these two between, like, for example, seeing a patient with this and this form. So the dinner fork is the falling on the Colle fracture on the dorsal of the hand, and falling on the flexed hand is the Smith fracture. I think we're almost done. Hopefully you haven't been too bored. Bit of wrist anatomy now. So we have, this is our radius, and this is our ulnar. So our radius is bigger at the wrist side and smaller at the humerus side, and it's inverse, vice versa for the ulnar. So the ulnar is smaller at the wrist side and bigger at the humerus side. So we've got our first thing here, and the way we, there's a nice little kind of mnemonic for the bones of the wrist. Simply learn the bones that the carpus has. Simply learn the parts that the carpus has. So our first S is scaphoid, S for simply. Learn is lunate. So this is actually, it looks like two, but it looks like one bone here, but it's actually two. So you've got the tracheatrium here. So simply learn the parts. This is the pisiform. Pisiform is because it looks like a P, so pisiform like P in Latin. Simply learn the parts that, this is called the trapezium. The trapezium is by their thumb, because the next one is called trapezoid, so it's hard to remember them. So simply learn the parts that the carpus, so carpus stands for capitate, carpus means wrist, carpus is this long, capitate is the big long one here, and H is hamate, and hamate, the hamate you can't see on the x-ray, but the hamate has like a little hook feature. So simply learn the parts that the carpus has, simply learn the parts that the carpus has, simply learn the parts that the carpus has. So learn those. Okay, what about this view? So here again we have our radius, a nice big chunky guy, and this one here is like a moon shape, so this is our lunate, and you can see here a bit of the scaphoid, and this big one that kind of slots into the lunate is your capitate. So your capitate and your lunate here, you can see in this view as well. This is your healthy, both of these are healthy. So you may be wondering, why is Escobar here? Well, we're talking about a scaphoid fracture. So the scaphoid fracture damages basically, you get tenderness in an area called your anatomical snuff box. So your snuff box is the area of your hand by your thumb, which is this kind of indent, and it's called snuff box because people used to sniff cocaine there, right? And that's why the police are here as well. So you've got the snuff box is made up by the styloid process, your extensor pollicis brevis, your abductor pollicis longus, and your extensor pollicis longus. So you've got your EPL, EPB, and abductor pollicis longus here. So again, the police are here because of the coke. So you get a scaphoid fracture when you get Fuchsigen, so you basically fall normally with your hands outstretched. And the symptom of the scaphoid fracture is a tender anatomical snuff box. But it's important to know these as well, because they can throw this in as another question, like describe the things that make up the snuff box, the borders of it. So you've got your styloid process of your radius, and then your three tendons. And also, so damage to the scaphoid fracture can cause your hand to really hurt when you're moving it in a circle, so circumduction. And also because the radial artery passes through here, you may get something called avascular necrosis, which is basically tissue death because of a lack of blood supply. So the next thing that you have, so these are your x-rays. So you can see here, this is your scaphoid bone, which is connected to your radius, and you can see that's your fracture there. What about this one? You can see here, that's your radius, that's your ulnar, and that's your scaphoid with a fracture across it. And just in this one here, you can see that's your radius, that's your ulnar, and that's your fracture there. Okay, so scaphoid fracture is tender snuff box, painful hand circumduction, and potentially avascular necrosis. All right, I think this is our last one. So finally we have a lunate dislocation. So remember, this is what a healthy lunate looks like. We've got our radius here, we've got our lunate here, which is like our moon-shaped bone. We've got our scaphoid, and then finally we've got our capitate, which kind of slots nicely into the lunate. So usually the radius should be touching the lunate, which should be touching the capitate. But in a lunate dislocation, and this is the only one that you'll be seeing the x-ray kind of side on usually, so that's kind of a clue in itself. But what can you see here? You can see your radius. There's your lunate, your moon-shaped thing, but you can see it's not touching the radius at all. And this thing here, which is the capitate, just there, is not touching the lunate. So the lunate has been displaced anteriorly this side, and it doesn't articulate with the radius of the capitate. And what about this one? We can see our radius, we can see our capitate, but our lunate here, which is this curved shape, is not touching it. So that's a lunate fracture. And you've probably heard of the carpal tunnel. So this is your carpal tunnel. You've got I think it's 9 ligaments that pass through this, and they basically sit on top of the lunate. So the lunate fracture can also cause, upset this median nerve which passes through the carpal tunnel, and causes carpal tunnel syndrome, which is tingling, numbness, and atrophy of your thenar muscles, and also pain in your lateral 3.5 digits. And again, you can see quite nicely on this one, the lunate is dislocated.